The rain hammered against the glass panes of Gilmart's trading hall like the sky itself was trying to punch through the night. In the main hall, the oil lamps had burned down to faint flickers, throwing weak golden light across the cold stone floor. I stood under the portico in my rain-soaked cloak, my hands still stained with oil from the late shift at the Western Armory. I should have been home by now, where my 7-year-old daughter Mira was sleeping with the straw-stuffed doll my wife had sewn 3 years ago. But one of the gate-lifting gears had jammed, so I stayed until the job was done. That was why I saw her. At first, I thought it was a thief. A lone figure stood in the middle of the hall, a small wooden trunk at her feet and 2 rough canvas bags beside it. But when I stepped closer, the lamplight caught her face and I froze. It was Lady Varka Oren, the orc mistress of Gilmart's trading hall, the most powerful woman in the border town of Eldor's Gate, the one merchants both respected and feared, the one who walked into council meetings with her back straight as a spear, her voice like steel and eyes that weighed every man's worth on the spot. But tonight, Lady Varka did not look like that woman at all. Her long black hair, usually pinned tight with a silver clan circlet, hung in wet tangles. The kohl around her eyes had run down her gray-green cheeks in 2 dark streaks like the last marks of a losing battle. Her dark velvet cloak was still expensive, but the collar was crooked as if she had thrown it on in haste. And her large, strong hands, the same hands that had once slammed onto council tables and silenced lords, were trembling as they clutched her own arms. "Lady," I said softly. She jerked around. For one brief moment, her spine straightened on instinct. Then it broke. The moment she recognized me, the composure shattered. "It's you," she said, her voice hoarse. "I thought no one else was left." I moved closer. My eyes flicked to the trunk at her feet, then back to her pale face. A woman like Varka did not stand in a dark hall at midnight with luggage if everything was fine. "What happened?" "Nothing," she answered too quickly. "I just had to stay late for work." I looked at the trunk again, then at her. "You don't look like someone who was working." Varka gave a short laugh that wasn't a laugh at all. It sounded like someone being forced to admit defeat. Then, as if the last wall had finally crumbled, she turned her face away and covered her eyes with one hand. "I've lost everything." The words hung in the silent hall, heavier than the rain outside. I said nothing. "My residence has been seized," she went on, each sentence falling lower. "My personal trading accounts are frozen. My former husband allied with his family and some of the old shareholders. They forced the council to strip me of control. They left me a hollow title, a few useless papers, and exactly 1 night to leave." She bent down and gripped the trunk's handle until her knuckles went white. "I have nowhere else to go." The sentence echoed between us louder than the storm. I wasn't nobility. I wasn't a hero. I was just a 35-year-old man who repaired crossbows and gate mechanisms, a widower for 3 years, living in a 2-room wooden house on the southern edge of town with my little girl. I knew what loss looked like. I knew how the world kept turning while your own life split in half. Maybe that was why I didn't think twice. "Would you like to come live with me?" Varka stared at me as if I had spoken the most insane sentence in existence. "Would I have a small house?" I said, only now realizing what I had just offered. "There's an empty room. It's not luxurious, and it's nothing a woman like you is used to, but there's a bed, a hearth, and a roof. If you need a place to stay until you sort things out." "Do you even know what you're saying?" She cut in, her voice suddenly sharp. "I am your former mistress, an orc woman just thrown out of her own trading hall. You are a widowed mechanic with a child. What will the whole town say?" I shrugged, more tired than reckless. "The town has been saying things for years." Varka looked at me for a long time. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. In her eyes, I saw the fierce war between pride and desperation. Finally, she asked very quietly, "What will your daughter think?" "I don't know yet." I answered honestly. "But Mira has a kinder heart than the rest of us." Varka turned back to her trunk, then to the rain beyond the doors, then back to the man standing in front of her, wet, oil-stained, but strangely steady. She nodded once. "Just a few days. Deal." I bent down and lifted the wooden trunk before she could protest. Varka started to object, but I was already walking ahead. That night, for the first time since my wife died, I opened my front door to a stranger, and I had no idea that the moment I did so would change not only my life, but my daughter's and the life of the orc woman who was still trying to stand tall amid the ashes of everything she had built. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle by the time we reached my house on the southern edge of Eldor's Gate. The small wooden building looked even smaller beside Varka's towering frame, its sloped roof and narrow porch glowing faintly from the single lantern I had left burning. Mira was waiting just inside the door, wrapped in her blanket, eyes heavy, but determined not to sleep until I returned. "Father's late," she complained the moment I stepped inside. Then her gaze slid past me and widened. "Oh." Varka stood in the doorway, rain dripping from her cloak onto the threshold. She looked every inch the orc mistress who had once commanded council rooms, yet tonight she seemed uncertain, almost out of place in my modest home. "This is Lady Varka," I said, keeping my voice steady. "She'll be staying with us for a few days." Mira tilted her head, studying the massive orc woman without a trace of fear. "Only curiosity. Are you hungry?" Varka blinked, clearly caught off guard by the simple question from a 7-year-old child. "Yes. Good. So am I." Mira slid off the bench. "Father makes soup." The night turned into something strangely ordinary after that. I reheated the pot of root vegetable and salted pork stew I had left simmering earlier. Mira set out the bowls with the careful concentration of someone performing an important ritual. Varka sat at the far end of the table, her broad shoulders making the wooden chair look like a child's toy. She ate slowly at first, as if testing whether the food might vanish or turn against her. But Mira's endless chatter filled the silence. "Father fixes crossbows really well," my daughter announced proudly between spoonfuls. "But he burns bread every time. Mother used to say he should only touch metal because that's the only thing he doesn't ruin." I froze for half a second at the mention of my wife. The name still carried weight in this house. Varka noticed. Her amber eyes flicked to me, but she said nothing. After the meal, I led Varka to the small spare room that had once been my wife's workspace. There was a narrow bed, an old wooden wardrobe, a desk by the window, and a single oil lamp. Nothing grand, but it was clean and dry. "You can rest here," I told her. "Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest." Varka's fingers brushed the edge of the desk. Her voice was quiet. "Why are you doing this?" I understood what she was really asking. "Because I couldn't leave someone with nowhere to go standing in the rain." "I am not just someone," she said. "I am trouble." Maybe I answered, "But tonight you're a guest first." She didn't argue anymore. She simply nodded, once the smallest gesture of acceptance I had seen from her all night. The next morning I left early for the market to buy fresh bread and hear what the town was saying. It didn't take long. The whole of Eldor's Gate was buzzing. Lady Varka Oren had been stripped of her residence and personal accounts by her former husband Goran and his faction on the council. But the whispers carried something darker. There were rumors she still held old trade charters for the northern salt routes and the official seal that controlled them. If those documents fell into the wrong hands, half the trading power in the borderlands would shift overnight. When I returned home, the house already felt different. The floors had been swept cleaner than I had managed in months. The table was wiped down, and Varka stood in the kitchen wearing one of my wife's old tunics, the sleeves too short on her powerful arms, the shoulders stretched tight, stirring a pot of porridge. She had clearly tried to make herself useful while I was gone. Mira sat on the bench, swinging her legs. She made breakfast. "It smells better than yours." Varka glanced at me, almost apologetic. I didn't know what humans eat in the morning, so I made what my people eat. Grain porridge with dried meat. "If it's not to your taste, it's fine," I said. And it was. Better than fine. We ate together. Mira asked Varka endless questions about orc stories and whether she had ever broken a spear in battle. Varka answered patiently, her voice softer than I had ever heard it in the trading hall. For the first time since my wife died, the house didn't feel hollow. But the peace didn't last. That afternoon, after Mira had gone to play in the yard, Varka pulled a small silver tube from inside her cloak. She set it on the table between us. "This is what they truly want," she said quietly. "The salt route charters and the official seal of the northern mines. Goran and the council think I still carry them. If they find this, they will take everything I have left, and they will come for anyone who helped me." I stared at the innocent-looking tube, then at the woman who had once ruled half the commerce in Eldor's Gate and was now hiding in my kitchen wearing my dead wife's clothes. "You brought that into my house. I had nowhere else to put it." The air grew heavy. Mira's laughter drifted in from outside. Varka's shoulders tensed as if she was already preparing to leave before she brought danger to my door. "If you want me to go before I bring harm to you and your daughter," she said, "I will leave before dawn." I looked at the silver tube, then at her. "You're staying," I said. She met my eyes. For the first time since the night in the hall, I saw something in them that wasn't just exhaustion or pride. It looked almost like hope. The days that followed settled into a rhythm I never expected. By morning, I would leave for the workshop at the old trading hall, repairing gate mechanisms and crossbow triggers like nothing had changed. But every evening when I pushed open the door of my small house on the southern edge, something inside had shifted again. On the first day, the floors were swept cleaner than I had managed in months. On the second, Mira's torn cloak had been neatly mended with stitches far stronger than my clumsy attempts. On the third, the back door hinge that had squeaked all winter was oiled and silent. "You know how to fix things," I said one evening, watching Varka tighten the leather strap on the door. She didn't look up. "I once led caravans across 3 borderlands. If you don't know how to repair what breaks on the road, you die before you reach the next town." Mira sat on the table, swinging her legs and grinning. "I like her." "I heard you," I replied. The house began to feel alive again. Mornings I left for work. Varka stayed with Mira, teaching her a few old orc words, showing her how to balance on one foot like a warrior and how to peel apples without cutting her fingers. Afternoons I returned to find my daughter riding on Varka's broad shoulders like a pony, or the two of them sitting on the porch stripping beans together. Evenings I walked into the kitchen and saw Varka stirring a pot with a wooden spoon that looked tiny in her large hand while Mira stood beside her giving orders like a little general. "Father, taste it," Mira demanded one night, eyes bright. She added purple spice leaves. "It's better than yours." "Thank you for the brutal honesty," I muttered. Even I had to admit her cooking was better, richer, warmer, with flavors that made the simple meals we used to eat feel like something worth sitting down for. Mira's laughter filled the rooms again. The silence that had lived here for 3 years slowly retreated, and I began noticing smaller things. The way Varka always chose the seat that faced the door. The way her shoulders tensed at the sudden sound of hooves on the road outside. The way her hands would freeze for half a second whenever anyone mentioned the council or her former husband. One night after Mira had fallen asleep, we sat by the dying hearth. The fire cast long shadows across the wooden floor. Varka stared into the flames. "Did you love him?" I asked quietly, then immediately regretted the question. She didn't snap. She simply kept watching the embers. "I once believed I did," she said. "When I was younger, I thought if a human man chose to stand beside an orc woman despite every stare, that had to be love. Later I learned some men only enjoy the thrill of claiming something rare. When the benefit faded, they left without looking back." I stayed silent. She turned to me. "And you? Did you ever think you would let anyone else into this house again?" I looked at the empty chair by the window, the one my wife used to sit in while sewing Mira's clothes. "No," I answered honestly. "Not until the night I found you standing in the great hall with a trunk and eyes that looked like you had lost the entire world. The air between us changed after that night. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was quieter. A glance that lasted longer than it should. The accidental brush of hands when we both reached for the same bowl and both paused. The night I fell asleep on the bench from exhaustion and woke with her cloak draped over me. But peace never lasts long in a border town. On the 3rd week, 2 men from the old trading hall came knocking. They claimed they were checking on workers. They asked casual questions about a certain orc lady who might have been seen in the area. I told them I knew nothing. They didn't fully believe me, but they didn't force their way inside either. When they left, Varka stepped out from the woodshed behind the house, her face tight. "They've tracked me here. I know. I should leave before dawn." "No." She looked at me. "Terran, they are not searching out of personal spite. They want the salt route charters I still carry. If they find them, they will destroy anyone who helped me." Mira came running from the yard at exactly that moment and caught the last words. "You're leaving again." Varka froze. "You just got here," Mira said, as if that explained everything in the world. "You haven't even finished telling me all the stories." I almost laughed even though my stomach was knotted with worry. That night, I locked every door, dimmed the lamps, and placed my heaviest hammer beside the bed. I understood now that this had stopped being letting someone stay for a few days. I was sheltering a woman hunted for something powerful enough to shake the entire trading council, and I had already made my choice. I wasn't letting her go. The confrontation exploded on market day. I had only meant to take Mira to the square to buy new cloth and a little honey. Varka had tried to stay behind, but Mira insisted the whole family should go. The word family made Varka go very still. Then she pulled on her plain cloak and came with us. At first, everything felt normal. People stared and whispered, but no one approached. Until Goran Vale stepped out from behind a spice stall. He was dressed in fine velvet, smiling that thin blade of a smile, flanked by 2 guards and the town magistrate. The moment his eyes landed on Varka standing beside me and Mira, the smile widened. "So this is where you've been hiding." Mira's small hand tightened around mine. I stepped half a pace forward. "What do you want?" Goran's gaze slid over my oil-stained tunic, then back to Varka. "I've come to collect my former wife so she can finish signing a few remaining documents. Oh, and to retrieve certain items that belong to the guild." Varka's voice was ice. "You already took almost everything, not the most valuable thing." The magistrate stepped forward and held up a sealed order. The crowd around the market stalls went quiet. This was the juiciest gossip Eldor's Gate had seen in months. "Lady Varka Orin, the magistrate, announced by order of the council, you are required to surrender the Northern Salt Route charters and the official seal if you are still in possession of them." "I don't have them." Goran smiled wider. "You were never a good liar." He nodded. One guard moved to grab Varka's arm. I shoved the man back before he could touch her. "Don't lay a hand on her." The entire market fell silent. Even Varka turned to look at me. "Do you understand what you're doing?" Goran asked softly, but the threat was sharp. "You're a widowed mechanic who lives on monthly wages. One word from me, and you'll never find work in Eldor's Gate again." I answered loud enough for the whole square to hear. "Then say the word." The crowd gasped. Goran hadn't expected that. Varka stepped up beside me, no longer looking like a woman cornered. For one heartbeat, she was once again the Lady Varka who had once made council lords fall quiet. "I am not going with you," she said. "You don't have many choices left." "I have at least one," she replied. "The choice not to crawl back to a snake." The insult landed like a slap across Goran's face in front of half the town. He snapped his fingers. "Take her." Chaos erupted. Varka snatched a wooden pole from a cloth vendor's stall and swung it hard. The first guard's wrist cracked. I hurled my basket of tools straight at the magistrate's head, then yanked over a heavy rack of pots to block the path. Mira screamed but held onto my belt as we ran. We bolted through the narrow southern alley, hearts pounding, the shouts of guards behind us. We didn't stop until we slammed the front door of our little house and barred it. Varka was breathing hard. "They won't stop at the residence anymore. If Goran suspects I still hold the salt charters, he will tear this town apart to find them." "Where are they?" I asked. She pulled the small silver tube from beneath her cloak. "Here." I swore under my breath. Mira ran in from the yard at that exact moment and caught the last words. "You're leaving again." Varka looked down at her. Mira's eyes were already filling with tears. "You just got here," my daughter whispered. "You haven't even finished the stories." Varka knelt, something I had never seen her do, and placed one large hand on Mira's shoulder. "I don't want to bring danger to your father and you." Mira threw her arms around Varka's waist. "If you go, this house will be sad again." I watched the two of them and felt something inside my chest crack open and settle at the same time. That night, after Mira was safely sent to stay with her aunt at the end of the lane, Varka and I stood in the kitchen. She was tying a short sword to my belt with steady hands. "If you come with me," she said quietly, "there is no going back to the life you had before. I know. Your people, my people, the whole town. None of them will let this rest. I know that too." She finished the knot and looked up at me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Why are you still coming?" I met her eyes. "Because I don't ever want to have to explain to my daughter that I let the person who matters most to both of us disappear right in front of me." Varka was silent for a long moment. Then she leaned in and kissed me. It was short, fierce trembling, as if both of us had been holding it back for weeks. Outside, the night wind moved through the fields. Inside, the oil lamp flickered. And by morning, we would leave the small house that had just become a home and walk straight into the fight that would decide whether we could keep it. The journey to Kardarak was harder than I expected. I was not a man built for long marches through forest and mountain. My shoulders ached under the pack, my legs burned on the steep stony paths, and sleep came in short, restless bursts against cold tree roots. But Varka always slowed her pace just enough for me to keep up. She divided the dried meat before she took her own share. When the night wind cut sharp through the passes, she wrapped half her cloak around my shoulders, even though she was shivering too. Somewhere on the second day, between the trees and the rising mist, I saw a different Varka than the one who had once ruled council halls. This Varka did not sleep deeply. Every distant sound of hooves made her sit up with a hand on her knife. This Varka spoke of her mother in short, careful sentences and then fell quiet for a long time. This Varka admitted, voice low, that if she had not met me that night in the Great Hall, she might have simply walked into the rain and let herself disappear. I told her about my wife, about the fear of losing one more person who mattered, about how I had thought my heart had already used up its last room. By late afternoon on the second day, we reached Kardarak, an old stone way station halfway up the ridge once used to collect salt taxes from caravans. It was not abandoned, as Varka had feared. A handful of loyal guards, an old quartermaster, 2 scribes, and a small escort still remained, men who had sworn to her bloodline long before the trading hall changed hands. When Varka drew out the silver tube and broke the seal, the entire room went still. The old quartermaster dropped to one knee. "We thought you were dead, my lady. I'm harder to kill than that." Word spread fast. By the next morning, Goran knew we had reached Kardarak and came with his men. He no longer wanted only the charters. He wanted Varka gone for good. The fight came in the courtyard at dawn. It was not a grand battle of thousands. It was ugly, close, and desperate, the kind border towns understand too well. I did not become a hero with a sword. I remained a mechanic. But that was exactly what saved us. I remembered the old gate mechanisms I had repaired for years. I climbed the wall, reset the counterweights and chains, and dropped the iron portcullis at the exact moment Goran's men charged. Then I triggered the old salt slide traps in the yard, turning the ground into a slick, sliding chaos that broke their formation. Varka fought in the center of it all, like someone finally allowed to be who she truly was. No longer a fugitive. No longer a guest. Just herself. When Goran was backed against the stone steps, bleeding and furious, he still tried to spit venom. "You think you've won? Even if you take back the salt roots, you're still just an orc who slept in a poor mechanic's house." Varka stepped forward, blade steady at his throat. "Yes," she said. And that was the kindest thing that ever happened to me. She did not kill him. Bind him, she ordered her men. I want him alive long enough to sign back everything he stole. 3 days later, the news reached Eldor's gate. The salt routes and the official seal were restored to Varka. The council turned on Goran with the speed of rats leaving a sinking ship. The same people who had whispered when she fell now bowed when she passed. We returned home at dusk. Mira ran from the porch before the cart even stopped crashing first into me, then throwing her arms around Varka's waist. I told you to bring father back. Varka's laugh was rough but warm. I keep my promises. Varka never moved back into the grand residence. She kept control of the trading hall, removed Goran's loyalists, and began reshaping the routes with fairer terms. But every evening she came home to our small wooden house on the southern edge. At first it was only until things settle. Then until Mira gets used to it. Then the big house is too cold and too empty. Eventually no one pretended it was temporary anymore. One quiet spring evening after Mira had fallen asleep on the bench, Varka stood by the window watching the fields. The oil lamp painted her face with soft light. I was wrong that night in the hall, she said quietly. I stepped closer. About what? When I said I had nowhere left to go, she turned to me. I just hadn't found it yet. I didn't answer with grand words. I simply reached out, took her hand, and pulled her close. No ceremony, no ring in that moment. Just the small house, our sleeping daughter in the next room, the flickering lamp, and two people who had once believed they were only helping each other through a storm. We had built a family instead, and this time no one was going to take it away.